The night the moon goddess chose me, I was carrying firewood, not dressed in silver silk, not standing among noble women waiting to be selected, simply carrying firewood through the edge of the crowd because I had been told to deliver it before the ceremony ended, and I was trying to do it without being noticed. I was not supposed to be there. Not in that part of the courtyard, not near the moon altar, not anywhere that mattered. I was a human servant in a wolf pack, the kind of person who existed in the spaces between important things, useful when needed, invisible the rest of the time. That was how I had survived 10 years in Dravenmoor. By being useful and invisible and never drawing attention to myself in a place that had made very clear from the beginning that I was tolerated rather than welcomed. Then the silver light came down, and everything I had built my survival on disappeared in 1 second. The light touched Kalian Voss first. Then it moved, straight across the courtyard, straight through the assembled noble women, straight through every wolf who had dressed and prepared and positioned themselves to be chosen, straight toward me. The firewood fell from my arms. The mark appeared on my wrist before I understood what was happening, and the entire pack turned to look at the human girl standing at the edge of the ceremony with wood scattered at her feet. The silence lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then the shouting began. Welcome to MoonNoir. If you have ever been in a room that decided you did not belong before you opened your mouth, this story is for you. Subscribe and like if this is your first time here. Let us begin. I need to tell you how I came to be in Dravenmoor before I tell you what happened after the light chose me. Because the story of how a human girl survived 10 years in a wolf pack matters. It matters because the person I became in those 10 years was the person who stood in that courtyard when the moon goddess made her decision. And understanding who she was explains everything that came after. I came to Dravenmoor at 15, not by choice. My village was on the border of Dravenmoor territory, a small human settlement that had existed in quiet arrangement with the pack for generations. We did not interfere with them. They did not interfere with us. It was not warmth. It was practical coexistence. Then a border dispute with a neighbouring pack threatened the village. The arrangement that had protected us required renegotiation, and the new terms included a human presence inside Dravenmoor itself. A gesture of goodwill between the village elder and the pack. I was the village elder's daughter. I was 15 years old, and I was the gesture of goodwill. I did not go willingly. I went because my father explained quietly that the alternative was worse for everyone, and that I was capable enough to survive it, and that he believed in me with the specific, desperate sincerity of a man who needed his daughter to believe the thing he was telling her so that he could also believe it. I went. I survived, not easily, but completely. The first year was the hardest. Every wolf in Dravenmoor had an opinion about the human girl assigned to the household staff. Most of the opinions were not kind. Some wolves ignored me entirely. Some were openly hostile. A few were simply curious in the way that people were curious about things they found unusual. None of them were warm. I learned quickly that warmth was not something I was going to find in Dravenmoor. What I could find was usefulness, and usefulness was something I understood completely. I worked harder than anyone else on the staff, not to impress anyone, because being indisputably useful was the closest thing to protection available to a human girl in a pack that had not decided what to do with her yet. I learned everything I could about how Dravenmoor functioned, not to gain power, to understand the landscape I was surviving in. By the time I was 17, I knew the household better than most of the wolves who had been born into it. By 19, I had been given additional responsibilities because I was reliable and observant, and the senior housekeeper had noticed both. By the time the moon goddess chose me, I was 25. I had been in Dravenmore for 10 years. I had never been warm. I had never been safe. But I had been here. And being here had made me into someone the moon goddess apparently found interesting. I was still not sure how I felt about that. The moon ceremony happened every generation. When the Alpha King reached the appropriate age and the moon was at the specific alignment the High Priestess required, the goddess revealed the chosen mate. It was the most sacred event in Dravenmore's calendar. Noble families had been positioning their daughters for months. The preparation was extraordinary. Gowns commissioned, hair arranged, manners rehearsed. Every eligible wolf woman in the territory had arrived with the specific, careful hope of someone who had been told they had a chance and had chosen to believe it. I was carrying firewood. I had been assigned to the supply delivery team because the ceremony required additional fires in the outer courtyard, and someone needed to ensure the wood arrived before the event began. I was doing my job. I was good at my job. I was also very aware that I was a human servant moving through the edge of an enormous, sacred gathering, and that the safest thing I could do was complete the delivery and disappear before anyone noticed me. I was almost finished. 3 more loads. 2 more. 1 more. Then the light came down. I've tried to describe what it felt like. Every description I have found falls short. The closest I can come is this. It felt like recognition, not of something external, of something internal, like a part of me that had always been present, but had never been addressed suddenly being seen, acknowledged, named. And then the mark appeared on my wrist. Silver. Permanent. Impossible. I stared at it. Then I looked up and found the entire ceremony looking back at me. Hundreds of wolves. Every noble family. Every arranged daughter. Every elder and warrior and council member who had gathered to witness the sacred selection. All of them. Looking at me. With the firewood at my feet. In my working dress. With my hair pinned up hastily because I had been doing physical work and not attending a ceremony. The silence lasted 3 seconds. I know because I counted. Then it ended. And everything that followed was the consequence of those 3 seconds. A human. The words moved through the crowd before anyone had organised them into a sentence. Simply the specific sound of a collective understanding arriving and being immediately rejected. A human. Someone said it clearly enough that it became a statement rather than a question. Then the shouting began. Not from one direction, from everywhere simultaneously. The specific sound of a large crowd that has just received information it does not want and has decided collectively not to accept it. This is wrong. The goddess has made an error. She is not worthy. She is not even a wolf. I stood in the middle of it. The firewood at my feet. The mark burning on my wrist. And I understood something very clearly. I was in danger. Not abstractly. Immediately. I could see it in the faces closest to me. The specific quality of people who have decided that something should not exist and are considering what to do about that. I thought about running. I thought about disappearing into the crowd the way I had learned to disappear. Then something happened that I had not expected. Kalian Voss spoke. 1 word. Enough. The courtyard went silent. Completely, instantly. the specific silence of several hundred wolves responding to the voice of their alpha with the instinctive obedience that pack structure produced. I looked toward the moon altar. Kalian stood at the head of it, tall, controlled, the kind of presence that changed the atmosphere of a space simply by asserting itself. His eyes were on the crowd, not on me, but the mark on his arm was visible even from where I stood, silver against his skin, identical to mine. The High Priestess spoke. Her voice carried across the silent courtyard with the specific authority of someone who understood that what she was about to say would not be welcome and was going to say it anyway. The moon goddess has chosen. The mark is real. The bond is real. She looked at the crowd. There is no error. The shouting tried to return. Kalian's eyes moved across the crowd. The shouting stopped. He looked at me last. His expression was completely unreadable. I looked back at him. Neither of us spoke. And in that specific silence between two people who had just been bound together by something neither of them had asked for, the next chapter of my life in Dravenmoor began. If the night of the ceremony was difficult, the days that followed were considerably worse. The pack had not accepted the goddess's choice. They had simply been silenced temporarily by their alpha. Silence and acceptance were not the same thing. I discovered this immediately. The morning after the ceremony, I walked through the palace corridors to my duties and found that every wolf I passed behaved as though I had become invisible in a new way. Not the useful invisible of a servant who moved efficiently through spaces. The hostile invisible of someone being deliberately excluded. Conversations stopped. Not the way conversations stopped when someone unimportant entered a room. The way conversation stopped when someone unwelcome entered a room. Eyes moved away before I could meet them, not from shyness, from the specific, deliberate quality of people who had decided not to acknowledge my existence as a matter of principle. The servants I had worked alongside for years were careful, not cruel, simply careful. The specific carefulness of people who understood that associating with me had become politically complicated and were not yet sure what the correct position was. I understood. I did not blame them. I had spent 10 years understanding exactly how social dynamics operated in Dravenmoor. What I had not fully prepared for was how it would feel to understand it completely and still have to walk through it every day. The noble families were less careful. 3 days after the ceremony, a council elder stopped me in the eastern corridor. He did not raise his voice. He simply said the thing he had decided to say with the complete confidence of someone who believed the statement was both accurate and reasonable. You should release the bond voluntarily. I looked at him. It would be better for everyone. I said nothing. He continued. There is a process. The High Priestess can facilitate it. Kalian would not need to be involved directly. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I said the thing that surprised us both. The moon goddess chose me. He frowned. An error. I held his gaze. That is not what the High Priestess said. He looked at me with the expression of a man who had expected capitulation and received something else entirely. Then he walked away. I stood in the corridor. My hands were not steady, but my voice had been. That was the first small victory in what I was beginning to understand would be a very long series of battles. I had seen Kalian before the ceremony, of course. 10 years in the palace meant I had moved through the same spaces as the Alpha King on hundreds of occasions. But the specific invisibility I had cultivated meant I had always been present without being noticed. He had never looked directly at me before the night the bond arrived. Now he looked directly at me frequently. Not with warmth, not with coldness. With the specific, focused attention of a man who had been given a problem he needed to understand and was applying his full intelligence to understanding it. He came to find me on the fourth day, not in the throne room, not in a formal setting. In the eastern garden where I had been assigned to oversee the winter preparation of the herb beds. I was on my knees in the soil when I heard his footsteps. I stood. He stopped a few feet away. We looked at each other. This was the closest we had been since the ceremony, close enough that the bond was present in a way I had not yet learned to manage. A specific awareness. Like standing near something very large and being unable to stop noticing it. "Are you being threatened?" he said. "Not are you all right? Not how are you managing? Are you being threatened?" I considered the elder in the corridor, the conversations that stopped, the specific hostile invisibility, not directly. He looked at me. What does that mean? It means nobody has said anything that could be reported. He was quiet for a moment. But things are being said. Yes. He nodded. I am assigning a guard. I did not want a guard. A guard would make the hostility more visible, not less. A guard would communicate that I needed protection, and needing protection would communicate vulnerability, and vulnerability in Dravenmoor was not something I could afford. I said none of this, because I was still learning who Kalian was, and I had not yet decided how honest I could be with him. "Thank you," I said instead. He looked at me for a moment longer. Then he turned and walked back toward the palace. He came back that evening, not to the garden, to the small sitting room outside my chambers. He was there when I returned from the herb beds, simply sitting, not waiting with urgency, simply there. I stopped in the doorway. He looked up. I sat across from him. We were quiet for a moment. Then he said something I had not expected from him. "Is it what you thought it would be?" I looked at him. Being here, in this position, I thought about it honestly. I did not think about it at all, I said. I was carrying firewood. Something moved in his expression. Almost a smile. "I know," he said. He was quiet again. Then, "It is not what I thought, either." I looked at him. His expression was the specific expression of a man saying something true that he had not planned to say. I expected the goddess to choose someone who already knew how to be what this requires. He met my eyes. Instead, she chose someone who has been learning Dravenmoor longer than most of my council members have been paying attention to it. I did not know what to do with that, so I said the honest thing. "I am still afraid." He nodded. "So am I." Neither of us said anything after that, but something between us settled, very slightly, into something that was not yet trust, but was the specific thing that came before trust. When he left, I sat in the doorway for a long time. The bond was quieter than it had been since the ceremony. Not gone. Simply less like a storm, more like weather. I was beginning to learn to read. I had known who Isolde Vale was for years. Everyone in Dravenmoor knew who Isolde Vale was. The daughter of the most powerful noble family in the territory. Educated, trained, positioned from birth to be exactly what Dravenmoor's Alpha Queen was supposed to be. She had been at the ceremony. Of course she had. She had been standing in the front row with the specific, composed confidence of someone who was not worried about the outcome. She had watched the light move past her and continue to the back of the courtyard. I had not seen her expression in that moment. I heard about it afterward. from a servant who described it with the specific, hushed tone of someone reporting something they knew was dangerous information. She had looked like a woman watching something be taken from her, not something she had been given, something she had always believed was hers. That distinction mattered. People who lost things they had been given grieved. People who lost things they believed they were entitled to became dangerous. Isolde found me on the 5th day, not in a corridor, not in a garden, in the great hall during the public morning assembly, in front of everyone. She crossed the hall with the specific, unhurried confidence of someone who knew exactly what they were doing and wanted witnesses. She stopped in front of me. She smiled. The specific smile of someone who had practiced the exact degree of warmth required to appear gracious while communicating the opposite. "I have been meaning to speak with you." I waited. This situation must be very overwhelming for someone in your position. I said nothing. She continued, "None of us blame you for the goddess's choice." Her voice was warm. Her eyes were not. You couldn't have known. Still, I said nothing. A lesser woman would have accepted the bond without considering what it costs the pack. She tilted her head slightly. "But I imagine you are not a lesser woman." The hall was very quiet, everyone watching, everyone waiting to see what the human servant would say to the most powerful noble woman in Dravenmoor. I looked at Isolde Vale. Then I said the thing I had been deciding whether to say since she crossed the hall toward me. "The moon goddess chose me." Isolde's smile held. I know. I held her gaze. I did not ask for it. I know that too. I let a moment pass. But it happened, and I intend to understand what it means before I make any decisions about what to do with it. Something moved in Isolde's eyes. Not the gracious warmth. Something colder. Something that was not interested in performing anymore. Then she smiled one final time. "I wish you luck with that." She turned and walked away. The hall remained quiet for a moment. Then conversation returned. I stood very still. That had not been a conversation. That had been a declaration. And I had just declared back. I was not entirely sure that had been wise, but it had been honest, and honesty was the only currency I had in Dravenmoor. 2 weeks after the ceremony, the great hall filled with every alpha elder and pack leader in Dravenmoor. I knew what it was before I entered. The specific quality of a gathering that had been organised with a predetermined outcome. The kind of meeting that was not actually a meeting. A presentation of a decision that had already been made. Kalian sat on the throne. I stood beside him. The hall hated that. I could feel it before anyone spoke. The specific collective hostility of a large group of people who had decided something and were present to make that decision formal. An elder stepped forward. "Your Majesty." His voice carried the practiced deference of someone who knew how to communicate opposition without appearing to oppose. "The pack has concerns." Kalian said nothing. The elder continued. "A human cannot govern wolves. A human cannot understand our ways. A human cannot lead us in war. A human cannot produce an alpha heir." Each point delivered with the specific measured rhythm of someone reading from a list they had prepared carefully. "The concerns are legitimate," he said. "The pack deserves a Luna who can fulfill the role completely." More voices joined. "The bond can be dissolved. The goddess would understand. Choose a proper Luna. The human should go." The hall became loud with agreement. I stood beside Kalian's throne. I did not look at the floor. I looked at the crowd. I looked at each face I could find. The anger, the resentment, the fear underneath both of them. Because that was what it was. Fear. Not of me specifically, of what I represented, a goddess who did not follow their rules, a future that did not match their expectations, a world in which the things they had prepared for were not the things that mattered. Then Isolde stepped forward. She moved through the crowd with the grace of someone who had choreographed this moment carefully. My king. Her voice was beautiful in the specific way of someone who had trained it to be beautiful. No one questions the goddess. She looked at me. But perhaps she wishes to test us. The crowd quieted. She always knew how to quiet a crowd. If the human truly deserves to stand beside you, let her prove it. The hall stirred. Several nobles nodded immediately. Isolde looked at Kalian with the expression of someone offering something gracious. 3 trials. The trials every Luna has always faced. If she succeeds, we accept the goddess's choice. A pause. If she fails, she leaves Dravenmoor. The hall erupted with approval. Kalian rose from the throne. His voice silenced the room immediately. No. The hall went still. My mate will not be tested to satisfy the pack's discomfort. Something moved through the crowd. Not acceptance. Something more complicated. I looked at Kalian. Then I said the thing I had been deciding since Isolde stepped forward. I will take the trials. He looked at me. The crowd looked at me. Even Isolde looked surprised. I held Kalian's gaze. I will take the trials, not because you require it of me. I looked at the hall, because I choose to. The crowd laughed. Not all of them, but enough. They thought I was foolish. Perhaps I was. But I had spent 10 years surviving in Dravenmoor by being useful and observant and honest. And the most honest thing I could see in that hall was this. The pack did not believe I could pass. And the only way to change that was to pass. The first trial required me to enter the Shadow Woods alone. To travel through the most dangerous section of Dravenmoor territory without weapons or wolf abilities. To retrieve a moonflower that bloomed only at midnight. And to return before dawn. The pack expected me to fail. I could see it in every face, watching me walk toward the tree line. The specific expression of people who are watching something they believe is going to go wrong and have decided to watch anyway. I did not look back. I walked into the Shadow Woods alone. The forest was dark in the specific way of places that have been left alone for a very long time. The kind of dark that had a quality to it beyond the absence of light. Dense, alive, aware. I had no wolf senses, no ability to see in the dark beyond what human eyes allowed. No ability to hear the things moving in the underbrush before they reached me. I had a lamp. I had my knowledge of the territory from 10 years of studying maps and records and the accounts of people who had travelled this land. And I had the specific calm of someone who had been afraid every day for 10 years and had learned that fear was not the same as danger. Fear was information. Danger was the thing it was pointing at. I found the moonflower at midnight. In the specific clearing the maps had indicated it bloomed. I cut it carefully. I began walking back. Then I heard the sound. Not the forest. Something larger. Something moving with the specific, deliberate quality of something that was not lost. I stopped. Then I saw him. A pack warrior. Young. Looking at me with an expression that contained several things simultaneously. The specific guilt of someone doing something they had been told to do, and had not fully examined whether they wanted to do. And something that might have been genuine fear. Not of me. Of what he had been sent to do. He was not here by accident. Someone had sent him, to ensure I did not return. We looked at each other in the dark forest. The moonflower in my hand. The distance between us. The specific suspended moment before something happened or did not happen. Then I heard another sound. Behind him. Something large. Something that was not a wolf. Something that had been tracking him. He heard it too. His expression changed. He turned, and I moved without thinking. Not away from him. Toward him. Because the thing behind him was going to reach him before he understood what was happening. And I understood what was happening. What followed was not elegant. I pulled him sideways by the arm. Hard enough that the thing behind him caught empty air rather than the back of his neck. We fell. It passed over us. I pushed him behind a large root. I covered the lamp. We lay in the dark without breathing. The thing moved through the forest, looking, not finding. Eventually it left. We lay in the silence for a very long time. Then the warrior said the thing that told me he had understood what had happened. You saved me. I looked at him. You were sent here to make sure I failed. He said nothing, which was its own answer. I looked at the forest where the thing had gone. Then I looked at him. Come on, I said. We need to be back before dawn. He followed me out of the shadow woods. In the morning, when I returned to the courtyard, he stood beside me, and he told the pack what had happened. Every word, including the part about why he had been in the woods, including the part about who had sent him. The courtyard was very quiet. A few wolves looked at Isolde. She looked at nothing. The first trial was complete, and something in the pack had shifted. Very slightly, simply slightly, but shifted. The second trial required me to settle disputes among the pack. 3 days. Every family, farmer, warrior, and elder who had a grievance they wanted heard. The elders laughed when it was announced. What can a human know about wolves? I knew that the disputes I was being given had been accumulating for years. I knew because I had spent 10 years in Dravenmoor, understanding how the territory functioned. I knew which farming communities had been disadvantaged by border agreements made without their input. I knew which families had been waiting for inheritance disputes to be resolved for longer than was reasonable. I knew which warriors had been passed over for promotions in ways that had never been adequately explained. I knew these things because I had paid attention for 10 years, while everyone else looked past me. I did not command. I listened. I let each person finish speaking before I responded. I asked questions that showed I had heard what they said rather than what I expected them to say. I used what I knew about the territory to identify solutions that addressed the actual problem rather than the stated problem. By the end of the second day, wolves who had been waiting years for resolution were leaving satisfied. Not because I was powerful, because I had paid attention. On the second day of the trial, something happened that I did not expect. A young female wolf approached the table. I recognized her. She had been in the courtyard the night of the ceremony. She had been one of the voices shouting, not cruelly, simply one voice in a crowd that was shouting. She sat down. She told me her dispute, a land boundary issue between her family and a neighbouring farm. 3 years unresolved. I listened. I asked questions. I found the solution in a boundary record from 11 years ago that neither family had been shown. She looked at the document for a long moment. Then she looked at me. Then she said the thing quietly that I did not expect. I was wrong about you. I looked at her. Not entirely, I said. You did not know me. She shook her head. I did not try to. She stood. She paused at the edge of the table. Then she did something small. She bowed her head. not the full formal bow of the ceremony, simply a small, genuine inclination, the kind that meant something because it was not required. Then she left. I sat at the table for a moment. One wolf, one small bow. It was not the pack, but it was the beginning of the pack, and beginnings were something I understood completely. On the third day, an elder who had laughed when the trial was announced came to me. He stood in front of me for a moment. Then he sat down, and he told me his dispute. I listened. I resolved it. He sat for a moment after I finished. Then he said something I had not expected. I did not think you could do this. I looked at him. I know. He nodded slowly. I was wrong. He stood and walked away. That was the second trial. Isolde was watching from the back of the hall. Her expression was the expression of someone watching a plan fail and calculating the next one. I noticed, and I prepared. I was not prepared enough. 3 days after the second trial ended, I was summoned to the High Priestess's chamber, not by Calian, by a formal council notice bearing the seal of the elders. I went. The High Priestess was there. So were 3 elders, and Isolde. Standing at the side of the room with the composed expression of someone who had arranged everything in it. The eldest elder spoke. A serious matter has been brought to the council's attention. I looked at him. An accusation has been made. I waited. He looked at the document in his hands. It is alleged that during the first trial, you used forbidden knowledge to navigate the Shadow Woods. I stared at him. Specifically, knowledge obtained through unauthorized access to sacred pack records. Records restricted to wolves of Alpha bloodline. The room was very still. I had accessed no such records. I had used maps, territory accounts, ordinary documents available to any senior household staff member. I said this. The elder looked at the document again. The accusation is supported by 3 witnesses. I looked at Isolde. She did not look back. She was looking at the floor with the expression of someone deeply troubled by what they were hearing. It was the most precise performance I had ever witnessed. I want to see the witnesses, I said. The elder hesitated. That is not standard procedure. I looked at him steadily. I am accused of accessing records I never accessed. I paused. I would like to see the witnesses who say otherwise. Another hesitation. Then the High Priestess spoke for the first time. She had been silent in the corner of the room since I arrived. Her voice was quiet and entirely certain. Bring them. The witnesses were brought. 3 young wolves. All of them from families closely connected to Isolde's household. All of them unable to meet my eyes. I looked at each of them in turn. Then I said the thing that came before any question. You are lying, not as an accusation, as a fact. The way you stated facts when you had spent 10 years learning to read rooms and the people in them. The first witness looked at the floor. The second shifted his weight. The third looked at Isolde. That look was everything. The High Priestess saw it. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said the thing that ended the proceeding. This matter requires further investigation before any action is taken. Isolde's composed expression did not change, but something behind it did. I left the chamber. My hands were steady. My mind was not. Not because the accusation had frightened me, because it told me something important about where we were. Isolde was no longer working at the edges. She was attacking the centre, and the centre was me. I went to find Calian, not to ask for help, to tell him the truth before someone else's version arrived first. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, He was quiet for a long time. Then he said the thing that told me we had finally arrived somewhere real. I believe you. Not I will investigate. Not I will look into it. I believe you. I looked at him. He met my eyes. Completely. Without management. Without the careful, controlled expression he wore in public. Simply a man telling a woman the truth. I know who you are, he said. I have been watching you for 10 years, without knowing I was watching you. He paused. Nobody who is what they accuse you of being saves the warrior sent to stop her. I held his gaze. Something settled between us. The specific weight of two people finally standing on the same side of something. He took my hand. Briefly. The way you took someone's hand when words were not the right tool. Then he let go and went to address the council.
For the fortress!
The third trial was never formally announced because the war arrived first. A neighbouring Alpha Kingdom had heard the rumours. A divided pack, a human Luna, a territory weakened by internal conflict. They moved their army to the border before we understood what was happening. It was discovered afterward that they had been receiving information about Dravenmoor's internal divisions for weeks. Detailed information. The kind that came from inside the palace rather than outside it. Isolde was arrested before the first battle ended. She did not deny it. She simply looked at Kalian with the specific expression of someone who had made a calculation and was not prepared to pretend otherwise. I did what was necessary, she said. Kalian looked at her for a long moment. You invited an army into your own territory. She said nothing. He turned away, and that was the last time either of us spoke of her. Kalian mobilized immediately. Warriors deployed, defences organised, the full weight of Dravenmoor's military structure moving with the specific, practised efficiency of a pack that had fought before and remembered how. I was told to remain in the palace. I remained in the palace for approximately 4 hours. Then the eastern defence broke. I was watching from the upper wall when it happened. The specific moment when a line of warriors was overwhelmed and the space behind them became accessible. Behind that space were the pack families, the children, the elderly wolves, the people who were not warriors, the people who had nowhere to go because nobody had organised an alternative route. I had spent 10 years studying Dravenmoor, including the mountain paths, including the routes that moved through terrain too narrow for a large force, but entirely adequate for families moving quickly. I went down from the wall. Nobody stopped me. Because nobody was watching me. Everyone was watching the battle. I organised the evacuation myself. Not dramatically, simply clearly. This way. Move quickly. Keep the children close. This path. Not that one. I knew the paths. I had read every map in the palace archive. I had walked several of them. I moved families through the mountain routes while the battle held the enemy at the valley. Then the watchtower at the eastern pass began to collapse. There were people still inside it. I heard them before I saw them. I ran. I got the last of them out before the structure came down. Then the structure came down. I did not get entirely clear. The pack told me later that Kalian felt it through the bond, the specific quality of pain that arrived in a mate bond when the other person was seriously hurt. He told me he stopped mid-battle, that his wolf made a sound none of his warriors had ever heard before, that he left the field before anyone could stop him. By the time he reached the eastern pass, the pack was already digging, not because he ordered them, because they wanted to. The same wolves who had stood in the great hall demanding I leave Dravenmoor were moving stone with their hands. They found me, injured, conscious, alive. Kalian reached me before anyone else. He did not say anything immediately. He simply put his hands on my face and looked at me with the specific expression of a man who has just understood something he should have understood much earlier. Then the battle ended. The invading army had collapsed when Kalian returned to the field, and in the courtyard of Dravenmore, as the sun came down, a pack that had spent months trying to remove me stood in silence looking at the human girl they had pulled from the rubble. The great hall filled one more time. Every alpha, every elder, every pack leader, every face that had been in the courtyard the night the moon goddess chose me. Kalian stood at the front. He did not begin with a speech. He descended from the throne. He walked across the hall. He stopped in front of me. Then he said the thing that ended the long argument Dravenmore had been having with itself since the night of the ceremony. When the moon goddess chose you, I accepted the bond. He looked at me. Today I choose you myself. The hall was silent. Then the oldest elder stepped forward. Slowly, he bowed. One by one the others followed. Then the warriors. Then the nobles. Then the entire hall. The same pack that had wanted me gone. The same faces that had shouted in the courtyard. Bowing. Not because a goddess required it. Because they had watched me move through everything they had put in front of me and had finally understood what the goddess had seen in the first place. I looked at Kalian. Then I looked at the hall. I thought about the night I arrived at Dravenmore, 15 years old, frightened, alone. The gesture of goodwill nobody expected to last. I had lasted. Not by becoming a wolf, not by pretending I was something I was not. Simply by being entirely what I was. A human girl who paid attention, who showed up, who did the work that needed doing without waiting to be asked, who did not leave when leaving would have been easier. Then the moon goddess spoke. Her voice filled the hall with the specific quality of something ancient, acknowledging something it had always known. A true Luna is not measured by blood. The silver light moved through the hall. She is measured by her heart. The light settled over me. I chose wisely. Then it faded, and the hall remained, full of wolves who had finally arrived at the same understanding the goddess had started with. Take a moment with that, then tell me which moment got you. The firewood falling. The silence before the shouting began. The elder in the corridor. Release the bond voluntarily. Isolde's smile. I wish you luck with that. I will take the trials. Not because you require it. The warrior in the shadow woods. You saved me. I was wrong about you. Not entirely. You did not know me. I did not try to. The elder who came last. I was wrong. I am still afraid. So am I. The false accusation. The 3 witnesses who could not meet my eyes. I believe you. He took my hand. The watchtower. Kalian feeling it through the bond and leaving the battle. The pack digging without being ordered. When the moon goddess chose you, I accepted the bond. Today I choose you myself. A true Luna is not measured by blood. She is measured by her heart. I chose wisely. Tell me which one. I read every single one. Subscribe and turn on notifications. The next story is already waiting. Until then, take care of yourself. And remember, they did not have to accept you from the beginning. They just had to get there in the end. MoonNoir.